Welcome back to Connecticut Newsmakers, and of course when we talk about the tragedy in Cheshire, we also talk about ongoing crime and violence that has pervaded our society for so long now, too long. And one of those who has addressed this and is attempting to address it on a daily basis is Rabbi Stephen Fuchs. He's with Congregation Beth Israel in West Hartford. And Rabbi Fuchs, thank you so much for coming in and being with us on our program.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, we heard from Marilyn Bartoli, and of course you've been, I know, very well aware of what's going on in the Cheshire thing, but this overall society that has seen much more violence than we would ever expect to see. What, in your estimation, is causing this?
Well, I think the tremendous amount of violence that our children are exposed to as they grow up, TV, movies, video games, I think that's a major factor and something we do need to address.
How do you go about making an impact in that area?
Well, first and foremost, and this should be almost without saying, parents have to be responsible for what their kids watch. No ifs, no ands, no buts, no maybes. But beyond that, I think there has to be some level of responsibility on the part of those who make the movies, make the TV shows, and make the video games. I'm not calling for censorship, Tom. I think that's a very dangerous thing, a slippery slope that I don't want to see society go down. But I am calling for self-discipline. I think that there is such a proliferation of violence. I think the Pettit situation is a perfect example. People are influenced by what they see on TV, what they see in the movies, and now what they do in video games. There's this new game, or not new at all, Grand Theft Auto, that's a series of things, and this is completely different. No longer do you just watch and absorb, you participate. In this particular video game, you're a small-time criminal trying to work your way up the ladder, and you do that by brutally killing a prostitute with a baseball bat, killing police, military personnel, and there are no moral consequences. And that's the change, a sea change. A recent Canadian study said that between 1993 and 2001, there were 378% increase in violent crimes in society. The latest American statistics that I was able to get hold of show that there were, in a given year, 1,390,000 cases of violent crime defined as assault, armed robbery, or murder. And I just have to believe that if there was less violence, I would love to see a moratorium on violence on TV. And I truly believe we would cut that rate of violent crime dramatically.
Rabbi, you're 100% right. And, you know, the other thing, too, I mean, you talk about censorship and so forth, and yet, how can we as a society, how can we in the United States of America allow a game that you just talked about, this video game you talked about, even exist? I mean, why do we allow that? I mean, okay, there's freedom of speech and there's all these other kinds of freedoms we have, but we also have the freedom of responsibility here. And I just wonder, there's no checks and balances. Why can't somebody say, this is not right, forget it?
Well, you know, that wouldn't be a bad thing. But given the way our system works now, I think the responsibility is on consumers to say, we won't buy this. And we won't buy products from companies that make it. And we won't watch the TV shows that perpetrate violence. And we won't buy the products that advertise the TV shows and the movies that perpetrate violence. I think that's where our responsibility lies. We have awesome responsibility in a democratic society, and we have to exercise it. Now, I've been told that my cause is like telling Exxon not to sell gasoline by saying I would like to get this message out to the TV, and they expect that TV shows are going to invite me, so I'm grateful. But they say, that's like saying to Exxon, don't sell gasoline, don't sell violence. That's what people want, unfortunately. That's what sells. And I know, Tom, I know that this has an impact because in my own life, when I was 9 years old, there was really a scary incident. In those days, we used to watch cowboy shows, Range Rider, Roy Rogers,
sure.
Cisco Kid, Lone Ranger, all of these. And the coolest move that I saw was when the hero would come up behind the bad guy who was trying to crack a safe in a bank, take the guy's own gun, say, hold it right there. I saw this a number of times. Now, you may not believe me, I wasn't a bad kid. But I saw this and I said, I'm going to do this. And so I decided to do it with the policeman on the corner of my schoolyard. I could have killed somebody. I could have killed myself. I waited until there were a bunch of kids crossing the street, reached into the cop's holster, and I got the gun about a third of the way out. He wheeled around, slapped me across the face. Of course, I ran into the schoolyard. And third period or so, when gym, they come out and they say, I'm wanted in the office. And I walk into the office, the cop is standing here, the secretary, I try to pretend I don't see the cop, and the secretary smiles, like, this gentleman wants to see you. Sit down, he screams at me, and he starts, understandably yelling. I'm looking up, there's this endless sea of brass buttons, and he says, you ever do that again, you're going to reform school. And, he scared the daylights out of me. Yeah, I'd like to see him today to tell him I did go to reform school, School for Reform Rabbis. But beyond that, Tom, it is, if I could be that influenced, and I would do that with the shows that were so mild. In those days, a crime would be committed in 5 minutes, and then by the end of the half hour, the criminal would be dispatched to jail. Everybody would live happily ever after until the next episode. Today, there's violence, blood, guts, body parts. It's terrible. The result, kids are less sensitive to it, more fearful of it, and more prone to act it out. That's why we have Columbines. I believe that's why we have the Pettit tragedy.
Has Senator Lieberman made some impact here?
Senator Lieberman is on board. I mean, he would like to see things a little bit. I also had a chance to ask this question of Representative Henry Waxman, who represents the entertainment district in Los Angeles. And he says, well, we can't have censorship. We can't have censorship. Congressman, we can't have censorship. All right, if that's how you feel, but can't we have some influence? Can't we have moral suasion? Can't we have a public that stands up? Can't we have leaders that say, this is destroying our society? Conservatively, I estimate, if we could have a significant decrease in violence, we would save 15% of the victims.
Right.
Now, I would love to see this, and I'd love to have us contact our TV stations, our movie makers, but think of it, if there are 390,000 violent crime victims, that's 208,000 lives. If we could just reduce that by 15%, and I think that's a conservative estimate.
Well, Rabbi Fuchs, I want to thank you so much for coming in. We want to stay in touch with you on this because this is an extremely important topic that we talked about today. And I wonder about the people who make these things and what they're thinking of, and it must be the almighty dollar again that's behind all of it.
It is the almighty dollar. But how many dollars is 208,500 lives worth, Tom? And if ever I could have a debate with these people or some sort of situation where we could speak to them directly, I'd be very grateful. They haven't answered my letters.
Rabbi, thank you so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us on today's edition of Connecticut Newsmakers. We'll see you next week.